First of all, welcome everybody. I just saw on the chat that there are so many friends from all over the world. This is such a happy gathering, and our Center for Translation organizes this seminar series. We were just saying a while ago, since the 1990s, and every month we have had one speaker talking to us about translation, sometimes practice, sometimes reflection, sometimes more conceptual works. Even during COVID, and during SARS, we continued this seminar series. It has not been stopped by any difficult situations. But today is really, really very special, at least for myself, because it's a great honor, a huge honor to have Dr. Omid Tofighian with us today. I remember when I read this book, No Friend But the Mountain, a translation work by Omid, I suddenly was reminded why I became a translator. Translation really isn't just an occupation, not just something, a profession. Suddenly was reminded that translation really matters. So I'm going to first introduce Omid to you. Dr. Omid Tofighian is an award-winning lecturer, researcher, and community advocate, combining philosophy with interests in citizen media, popular culture, displacement, and discrimination. He completed his PhD in philosophy at Leiden University in Netherlands and graduated with a combined honors degree in philosophy and studies in religion at the University of Sydney. He has lived variously in Australia, where he taught at different universities, the United Arab Emirates, where he taught at Abu Dhabi University, Belgium, where he was a visiting scholar at KU Leuven, Netherlands for his PhD, Egypt, where he was an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy and the Department of English and Comparative Literature at the American University in Cairo, and intermittent periods in Iran for research. He is an adjunct lecturer at the School of Humanities and Languages, University of New South Wales, and an honorary research fellow at Birkbeck Law, University of London. He contributes to community arts and cultural projects and collaborates with refugees, migrants, and youth. He has published and translated numerous book chapters, journal articles, and media articles, and his publications include Myth and Philosophy in Platonic Dialogues, translation and collaboration in Behrouz Boochani's multi-award-winning book No Friend But the Mountains, writing from Manus Prison, co-editor co-editor of special issue for journals Literature and Aesthetics, Alpha Veil, Journal of Film and Screen Media, and Southerly, and also co-translator and co-editor of Freedom, Only Freedom, The Prison Writings of Behrouz Boochani, and creating and this very new book, just hot and fresh from the publisher, from the printer, and creating new languages of resistance, translation, public philosophy, and border violence. So, without further ado, Omid, please. Thank you.
You very much, Jessica. It's wonderful to collaborate with you. Thanks for all your support and giving me this platform. I also want to thank everyone else who's been involved, Wei Ping, Esther, the university and the centre. It's great to be here. I have so much to talk about and so many different approaches and different themes and issues that I've never talked about before to share with you all. But first of all, I'd really like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I live and work now, the Darug people. And I want to pay respect to elders, past, present, and emerging. This is really important to me because so much of the work that I do, in whether it's cultural and critical border studies, whether it's public philosophy, whether it's issues related to racism, colonialism. So much of that is rooted in the resistance and the survival of First Nations peoples. And also a lot of the themes that I'm going to be talking about today are directly related to that. When thinking about the border, it's important to understand that so many of the technologies, so many of the approaches, the mentality, the ideology is rooted in the displacement and dispossession and ongoing genocide of First Nations peoples. I've got a lot to say, as I mentioned, and I'm going to jump straight into it. So I'll share my screen with you. And of course, thank you to everyone who joined to listen to my talk. Thank you very much for being here. So on the left-hand side is the cover of my new book. Now, I'm not going to talk about the cover of the book, but there is a very special, very, I think, uh, empowering and yeah, maybe even you could say mystical story behind the cover. But I wrote. I'm not going to discuss it because I have a preface in the new book where I actually explain the significance of the cover, the artwork on the cover, and it's also a cover that I selected after I finished the book. So even though it's interrelated, it has a story of its own. It'll take a very long time to explain. But the artwork is by a relative of mine in Iran, who also was subject to border violence and persecution throughout his life. And also the way he was inspired by a very famous Iranian poet, Ahmad Shamlou. Now, Ahmad Shamlou was also a translator. And what inspired Parviz, my relative, Parviz Ogorov, to make this painting. He's a master painter, and he's very prolific in his practice. But what inspired him to create this one was a poem that Shamlou translated from German, a poem by Margot Bickel. So, as you can see, there's so much related to my book in the cover, but I'm not going to go into the full story. That's in the preface of the book. And my talk is going to have two parts. So first, I'm going to talk about collaboration, activism, translation, and storytelling, and then also translation and public philosophy. And then in the second part, after questions, question and answer related to the first part, I'll discuss examples from Australia's what I call carceral border archipelago, and I'll explain what I mean there. So my new book, Creating New Languages of Resistance, really the themes, topics, aims, and purpose are: one, shared philosophical activity, and these are some of the things that I'll talk about today, I'll expand on today. Two, the kind of public philosophy explored in the book. Three, collaboration and experimentation. Four, chiriarchy, the chiriarchal system and chiriocentric language. Five, horrific surrealism. Six, the border industrial complex, refugee industry, and pro-refugee, anti-refugee disposition. Seven, damaging tropes used to represent displaced and exiled peoples. And finally, the two-island thought experiment, the interdependence between the carceral border and the nation state, what I refer to as an inside-outside dynamic, and the issues pertaining to epistemic standpoints and positionality. So there's a whole mix of critical and cultural border studies, with merging with philosophy, with literary criticism, and of course translation studies. So here are some of the works that I've been involved in that are more well known. So of course, as Jessica referred to before, No Friend But the Mountains and Freedom Only Freedom, the second book that I co-translated and co-edited with Manus Prison. There's the film Choka, Please Tell Us the Time that I worked on. Oh, I did the subtitles for. There's also the work of Elahe Zivardar, who was on Nauru, held in Nauru for 6 years, and who is an architect, an engineer, and an artist, and basically made a render, an architectural render of the detention center. And we've worked on numerous projects together, and one of her paintings, as part of her painting series, is there as well in the corner. But we'll also talk about some people who aren't as well known, and other people who I've collaborated with. So on the left-hand side, we have Muhammad Adam, who I'll discuss towards the end in the second part, where I refer to examples. The exhibition you see there is an exhibition using Elahe's archive from Nauru. Below that is one of her paintings, which ended up being on the cover of a special issue of Southerly that Jessica also referred to in my biography. Now, this is a really important special issue that was co-edited with Behrouz Boochani, Janet Galbraith, Hani Abdillah, and myself, and has over 100 contributions by people who experienced immigration detention. And Muhammad Adam, at the top left-hand corner, some of his work is published in there. Martin Arvin, who that shot was taken while he was in hotel detention. He was detained in a hotel after 5 years in Manus. He was transferred for medical purposes and then locked up in a hotel. He was writing and sending to me to translate while he was in Manus, Port Moresby, and in Melbourne in a hotel. And Benam Sata, who is also a translator, an interpreter, an activist, and you could say I have referred to him in many different ways in terms of all the work that he does, but he's most well known as the main leader in Manus Island. He was a leader of the Kurdish and the Iranian community, but in general worked as the main leader, uniting all the different communities. And it is a real privilege. It's an honor to have him join this seminar. So hi, Benam, thank you for joining, and thank you for all the work that you do. And I'll be talking about Benam at the end when I give some examples. Would you like to say a quick hello, Benam?
Hello, everyone. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be with you. Thank you so much for having me. And I am very grateful of Dr. Tofighian for all his hard work in past years that we have been collaborating with each other while on Manus, after on Port Moresby, and then in France, where I am currently in. I wanted to express my deepest appreciation to everyone who attended this meeting, and it's an honor to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Benam. What I'm going to do, it's really great that that you're here, and maybe later in the Q&A we can engage in some more conversation. But what's important is that one of the things I emphasize in my book is the vital role that translators and interpreters played, not just people like me from the outside, but people who are translating and interpreting in the prison itself. And this is something that has been forgotten and hasn't been supported because, of course, the Australian government wasn't supporting refugees in that way, and or their support was not sufficient in any way. And people like Benam took on that role, and so there's this really interesting function that people like Benam played in the resistance from within the prisons, which I'll talk about later. So. New languages of resistance. I have an introduction at the beginning where I talk about translation practice and public philosophy in the context of creative resistance and collective knowledge. So there's a lot of theorizing from a philosophical perspective there, from using a lot of epistemology, thinking about this resistance, this creative resistance, as a form of epistemology. The chapters, there's 5 chapters. There's the titles of the chapters are there. I won't read through them, but it's important that after every chapter, I have a notes on translation. So I select 1 or 2 or 3 quotes that I use in the chapter, and I actually they're basically quotes from No Friend But the Mountains, and I use the original text messages that I use to translate the book. I bring those and analyze them alongside the translation and show the kind of the arguments that I make in the chapter about experimentation, about research, about a decolonial vision, about so many themes. I really unpack those by putting the original Persian text messages alongside the published literature and show that there's, the kind of journey that took place to go from raw, unedited text messages to award-winning literature in the end. And after the translation, the notes on translation, I have an appendix, and here I want to show in the appendix I show the public face of this kind of work. So I show I published one of my interviews at the end of every chapter where I engage with someone from the community, or I engage with someone from the media, or someone who is involved in literature or academia in some way, to show that this kind of work has this multi-pronged approach, intention. And what's really important is that there are two of my own translations in these appendixes. So at the end of one chapter, there's a translation of my first Persian language interview with SBS Persian. And at the end of another chapter, there's my first academic seminar in Persian that I edited, or I cut and paste in my own sections and translated it, so that there's this whole new perspective. There's English. There's also an interview I did in English with SBS Kurdish as well, and some of the people that I engaged with were translators themselves. So there's this really interesting mix of different genres, not just in terms of the kind of work that I'm doing, but also in the way that I'm presenting it and analysing it. And I finish off with more translators' reflections as the conclusion. Now, there's one issue I refer to as a shared philosophical activity, and I referred to that earlier, but to give you some sense of what I mean by shared philosophical activity, I discuss it in a lot more detail in some of these examples of scholarship, some of these other publications. But in my book, I talk about shared philosophical activity as involving people formally trained in philosophy and non-specialists co-creating new collaborative translation, artistic and cultural productions with philosophical resonance. That is, we're exploring new collective forms of doing philosophy and introducing new co-devised philosophical questions, concerns, terminology, theories, and critiques. The collaborations that I've been involved in are with people incarcerated or recently released from Australia's carceral border archipelago. And by this, I'm referring to Manus Island and Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea, the Republic of Nauru, Christmas Island, and the Australian mainland, and also in Indonesia, Australian-funded and managed in detention centres in Indonesia. So each collaboration is distinct because of the different interdependent interactions within the process, the diverse positionalities involved, and their specific lived experiences, the shifting and accumulative political conditions, the multiple discourses that change and combine at every stage in the different collaborations, and the separate methods we devise together in each project, and vicissitudes pertaining to their modes of production. So there are so many different factors, so many different features that go into understanding what I'm referring to as a shared philosophical activity. And when thinking about this shared collective work, this collective form of resistance, it's important to put it into the context of creating a public philosophy. So in the following list, I try to sum up some of the many approaches and perspectives pertaining to public philosophy. So in the first way, it's philosophers repurposing their theories and arguments. In the second example, it's producing work, targeting non-philosophers. Responding to requests is number 3. Requests, questions, concerns. Number 4, philosophers introducing questions and ideas to encourage non-philosophers. 5, identifying artistic and cultural productions that have philosophical relevance. 6, the philosophers identifying artistic and cultural productions and questions and concerns as different forms of doing philosophy. And philosophers combining or critiquing issues that arise in different contexts that were originally discussed and debated amongst non-philosophers. So all of these are great, but the problem is that they center the philosopher. The philosopher becomes the leader, the main expert, the guide, the initiator, the adjudicator. So in my work with people in immigration detention, that could have very easily slipped into a form of exploitation, of me taking advantage, dictating how people with lived experience should think and act and analyze and produce and resist. There is another mode that hasn't been fully explored, and that is philosophers producing in collaboration with non-specialist individuals, groups, and audiences. So here we're thinking about philosophical work as interdependent. I can't do this work on my own. The people in the prison can't do it on their own. We need each other. We need this collective form of resistance. We need a new practice, a new vision, a new methodology in order to produce this kind of resistance, produce this kind of knowledge. Now, I'm just conscious of time, but I think the important thing is that our collective work also represents a profoundly unique and indispensable historical archive. So apart from it being a form of knowledge, we're basically disrupting, challenging, and dismantling the official narrative. So my aim in this book is to honor the translating, the planning. Also, my hope is that this book can provide models for similar collaborations in the future. One more thing that I'll discuss is maybe not in so much detail, but it's the idea of horrific surrealism. And I was thinking of a lens, a framework, in order to understand how to analyze, how to unpack, how to critique what was taking place, but also how to connect all the different parts. Because like I mentioned before, there's so many different moving parts taking place. There's translation, there's co-writing, there's activism, there's so many different kinds of work taking place here. To connect them, one of the ideas that I had was to devise or develop this idea of horrific surrealism, where I take psychological horror and horror realism and combine that with anti-colonial forms of surrealism. So thinking about going all the way back to André Breton, and especially with the kind of anti-colonial surrealism that was practiced in the Caribbean, in Latin America, in different parts of Africa, and especially you can see it in so much of the magical realism, surrealism. There's a lot of blurring between the two that takes place in the Middle East. You can find it especially in Kurdish cinema. I'm thinking in particular of Bahman Qobadi's work, but also many other parts of the Middle East and North Africa use this particular kind of surrealism as a form of resistance, as a form of unpacking and exposing colonial domination of many forms. And you can see here from the little quote that I've got from one of my articles, the different features that categorize or identify the significance of surrealism and why horrific surrealism is more apt in terms of describing. This is a shot from Choka, Please Tell Us the Time, the film that was shot in Manus by Behrouz Boochani and co-directed with Arash Kamali Savastani in the Netherlands. And I created the subtitles for this film. And again, the film, I think, represents horrific surrealism. This particular shot is very striking in those terms, but also the translation of the dialogues. Also have those features, have the horrific surrealism features. So here I have the different examples of major themes or trajectories in the horrific surrealism work. So there's collaboration, activism, translation, and storytelling, which is right across the board. We have some of the features such as disruption, fragmentation, disjointedness, and shattered phenomena. Some of the things that I mentioned before about the psychology, the dreams, the assemblages, the natural environment, so many other things. And at the bottom, all of these feature in the identities of people we're working with, the political landscapes, the mode of production, and the literary or creative dimensions. And there's a reinforcement because all of these different features support each other, enhance each other. You find all of these features in the identities, giving texture, giving character, giving direction, and giving meaning to the political landscape. And then from that, moving on to the mode of production, and then the creative dimension. So there's this reciprocal reinforcement or mutual emboldening taking place. For lack of time, I won't go into too many details, but there's one of the things that I think is important in my book, and I explain in a lot of detail, is the border industrial complex, the refugee industry, the industry that's created to, and this is involving people right across the political spectrum, using refugees for political or monetary gain. And even in many respects, people who are supporting refugees kind of reinforce particular stereotypes or tropes in the kind of work that takes place. It kind of goes back to what I was saying before about dominating or removing agency from the people who have lived experience. So this idea of the refugee industry is not just about the people, the politicians, the companies who are benefiting from immigration detention. It involves all of us. We're all complicit, including myself, working so closely with refugees. In many ways, I'm also benefiting from that. And the kind of concept I use is pro-refugee, anti-refugee disposition. And I use paradox there on purpose, not because it's an oxymoron, but I'm inspired by the philosopher George Yancey, who refers to, in his analysis of race, in his critical philosophy of race, he uses the term anti-racist. And I was really inspired by that, what's seemingly paradoxical, but he shows that it's in so many ways, when you think about the structural dimensions, when you think about the context, the history, it's impossible to remove yourself, to be non-complicit. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there for questions. And then I can move on. There's, like I said, there's really so much to talk about in this context. But I'd like to maybe give some time to the audience to engage, and then we can go back and look at some examples.
Right. Thank you very much, Omid. I think we have time to take a few questions first. So if you have any exchange, please either I think just turn on your mic and unmute yourself and speak, or give us a wave and we can tune you in. Or if it's easier for you, please type your questions or your sharing.
Would you like to? Can I pick the Jessica, or would you like to? Yep. Okay. Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim.
Thanks indeed for your informative presentation.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Can I ask 2 questions, please?
Of course.
What are the disadvantages of language knowledge across border, and what advantages? The second question is, what the advantages from creating a new language of residence across the borders? Thanks indeed.
I think by the way, excellent question. And questions, and I think I could give a whole seminar on the advantages and the disadvantages because there are so many on both sides. I mean, the kind of work that we're doing doesn't necessarily always have positive outcomes, even though there's so much passion and so much understanding between the collaborators. In terms of knowledge, in terms of the literary work, working across borders, I think first of all, the disadvantage, I'll start with the disadvantage, is that there's no way to avoid the power imbalance between me and the people I'm working with. So sometimes it will take a while before we can even up the power imbalance. And when it comes to knowledge, I think, when it comes to producing knowledge, especially knowledge that is so important and so it's so exclusive, the way that it's produced, and because everything is so urgent, you often don't have time to plan. We're not sitting in offices trying to think about epistemological questions. We're not thinking about analyzing the ethics or the political philosophy behind what we're doing, the ethics in terms of what we're doing is right or wrong. There's just, everything is urgent. These are people in immigration detention. It's indefinite. They're subject to systematic torture, and we're bound to get things wrong, especially me. We're bound to get things wrong. We have to get it done, and we have to, I guess, work on the spot or learn on the job. And so in the cross-border situation makes that even more difficult. Now, I think that the positive is that with communication technology and with these new kind of situations around the world, and I think that there's potential to go to find new spaces. I often think about the text messages that I work with as the feeds, the text message feeds themselves are like a prison. It's a replica of imprisonment. The kind of the WhatsApp feed, and so everything reinforces each other. Everything produces kind of new perspectives, kind of new concepts, new theoretical frameworks. So these are the positives, but the fact that everything is so new and exciting, and at the same time so risky in terms of getting it wrong. Your second question was about, so that one was about the epistemology and the literature. The second one was creating new languages of resistance in general. What I understood was basically what are the advantages and disadvantages of doing this kind of activism. I think that if I went back to the beginning when I started doing the translation work, especially for No Friend But the Mountains, I would have been a lot more careful in terms of how it was absorbed in the refugee industry. So our plan was that this was about collective resistance. This was about thousands of people, who are subject to these kinds of conditions, subject to these kinds of policies. This is about colonialism. This is about history. This is about a new philosophy. However, what we noticed was that it was very easily swept up by the kind of celebrity status associated with somebody writing in a detention center, and so many people started to focus more on an individual story rather than the collective resistance, and then there was so much about the fact that what was produced was exemplary. In fact, No Friend But the Mountains could have been created with thousands of different people. I find it very inaccurate, and it's a misrepresentation to think about what happened with No Friend But the Mountains as a miracle, as some academics especially have referred to it. It's a miracle that this came into being. No. If you look at the way that we worked together with a whole range of different people, people in the prison, people outside the prison, colleagues, I write about this in some of my work, but it hasn't really been taken up as much as we would have liked. But they kind of see what's happening as something almost magical, mystical. And this is one of the tropes we're trying to avoid. This is about the power of collective work. And that's the thing that's been ignored. In my third chapter in the book, I talk about Betnam's work in the prison and how so much of the resistance he was involved in, so many of the talks that he was involved in, so many of the ways that he was leading, governing what was taking place, the different kinds of activism, actually led to so much of the content in something like No Friend But the Mountains, but also stuff that journalists have written on and filmmakers have made and other things. When you think about it as an isolated product, then it seems a miracle. How could this ever be created? But in fact, it's very possible when people come together. They have the right skills, they have the right passion, they have the right vision, they have the trust between each other. We can produce this over and over again. We just don't have the resources and support. And I talk in my book about how to understand a translation work. You need to go through. You have to understand the planning that takes place. And that planning could go back decades in some cases. The process and the complexities associated with the process, and then the product. There's so much emphasis on the product when there's so much misinterpretation or marginalization, or just plain ignoring the planning and the process.
Thanks indeed for your answers. I wish you the best in all your futures and your new books in the future. Thanks indeed.
Thank you. That were excellent questions.
Thank you. And thank you, Omid. Do we have another question?
Yes. Is it Morvan?
That's
Is that correct?
Right. Beaton Tomei from Cologne University, well, not Cologne University, the Technical University of Cologne in Cologne, Germany. Fantastic subject, really, really interesting work. I come at it from the kind of political side of things in translation and an interest in political discourse and ideology, subversion and activism. So I'm coming
Excellent.
at it from a non-literary background. Really, really interesting. I thought what you said resonated with me so much when you said, how complicit are we? You know, we can't get ourselves sort of get out of this embeddedness in the system. And I wonder, you know, the title of the book, Creating a New Language of Resistance, how did you struggle with that while writing about resistance, that you're also in that language of the industry or the complex or whatever you want to call it? This is something that we've looked at in corpus studies as well, in political discourse, where the language of activists mirrors that of the dominant ideology, you know, so it's not, we're not making a new language, we're kind of co-opting or being co-opted, if I don't know what way around you want to say it, by the dominant. So that's really interesting. That would be very interesting for me. How did you, you know, the awareness definitely is something. How did you deal with that while writing? Then secondly, how do you feel about your role as kind of translating perhaps some of these ideas into academic discourse? Or is that something you're not wanting to do? You know, you said what you're not wanting to do is to be the academic that's kind of, you know, coming at it from outside and talking about it. But how do you negotiate that role? Because there is an element of translating it into an academic monograph. Yeah. I don't know if you have an answer. It's just a very interesting topic.
I do. I have maybe way too much to say about this, especially the academic part of your question. And I've written about this in my new book and in other works that I've done. And I'm happy to send you some of the other work that I've done. But my new book, I talk about all of this. So, so with the pro-refugee, anti-refugee disposition, and I think George Yancey is very instructive on this topic. His idea of anti-racist, really helps in terms of theorizing, self-reflecting in terms of complicity and what needs to happen if someone is genuine about transformation. So with the pro-refugee, anti-refugee disposition, I think about it. I think it's helpful to think about it in terms of degrees. We're all complicit, but there are degrees of complicity, and being aware of to the extent to which you're complicit, or in which ways, in which kind of spheres you're complicit, and debating with people who are also self-conscious. So, for example, I think in 2015, UniSuper, my university superannuation fund, they said that they are divesting from immigration detention. So until 2015, I was working with refugees, helping refugees, but profiting from immigration detention because my superannuation was invested in it. Now, after that, after 2015, we still don't know whether the UniSuper has fully divested. And there hasn't even been a really kind of rigorous investigation into how the extent to which they've divested, if they really have, and you know, whatever else, however else it's complicit. You know, if thinking about universities even, there's a lot of research projects in different areas related to border politics, you know, whether it's surveillance, new technologies, home affairs, you know, whatever they're called in different countries, you know, the kind of immigration and the immigration departments and the immigration ministers, the way that they engage with different actors, different stakeholders, all of this, you know, if we look at the paper trail, we can find out how we're complicit, but it really takes some effort to do that. Not a lot, but it takes some effort. And also maybe thinking, I think there's also a fear maybe because, you know, there's also, for example, unions that are invested in immigration detention. And, you know, unions do so much fantastic work in terms of workers' rights, but they also, some of them invest or have people who are union members, who are working in immigration detention. So all of these are really difficult, uncomfortable questions. So I think there is a bit of fear about taking this approach. So with myself, when it comes to writing, I try to minimize the anti-refugee and maximize the pro-refugee without ever being complacent, thinking that I can be free of exploitation. And when the way I do it in my writing is trying to prioritize the voices of the people I work with. So there's so many ways to do this. So for instance, making sure that if I'm writing about someone, I've worked with that person in terms of publishing their own work before, whether they're my translations or someone else's translated. Someone like Behrouz, for example, I met Behrouz 2017, and he had organized a protest in the detention center in support of the people protesting in Iran against the government. And that image appeared in my article where I had translations by quotes from Behrouz and another refugee, Farhad Bandesh. And so Behrouz's work in the detention center featured in the article, and it was later that we started to work together. And you know, we prioritizing the kind of work that is often unseen, unacknowledged. So that's how I do it, and also co-creating. And this goes to academic articles. I've got many academic articles that I've published because I've published based on the fact that I haven't published based on the fact, but I've published with the intention of publishing with someone else who is in detention, or I've supported someone to publish under their own name without me being a co-author or anything like that. So there's right at the end of my book, in the conclusion, I have an example of the kind of collaborative work that we do, the collaboration, activism, storytelling, and translation that come together. And that is a statement that Benham put out about going to challenge the Australian government at The Hague, at the International Criminal Court. And so these are different kinds of examples you can find. You have to be creative when it comes to doing that. But I found that in a lot of cases, especially academic publications, are looking for this unconventional, non-traditional style. We're still, I think, in academia, a very long way away. And like I said, universities are complicit, but yeah, this is where I start.
Thank you very much.
Excellent question as well. So much to say about it.
Do we have any other question?
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
My name is Sharice. I'm a total outsider to translation and all of that. But you mentioned, something about Monday trust. And I wanted to know, because even with good intentions, you can often be, as you said, you can often misplace your good intentions and accidentally, or just create an externality that you did not mean to create. Like, you may be complicit and all of that. But what my question boils down to is, how do you create that trust? How do you build that trust between two people, between one that's been incarcerated and dehumanized, and how do you kind of, how do you step towards that process of of coming together, empathizing? I'm very interested to know.
Yeah, fantastic. And again, a lot to say about it. And I think my answer will also relate to the previous question as well. Everything that we've been involved in, because like I mentioned at the beginning to the first question, that everything was so urgent and pressing, and there was no opportunity to plan and kind of like do our research and get so much background information before stepping in. We had to work, learn on the job, and we had to work at a really rapid pace because people's lives were depending on it, people's situations, their futures were depending on it. So in answer to your question, I'm still learning about the best ways to do that. But one of the things that helped me was, I think, my own history of displacement and exile, my own experiences of discrimination and being a minority in Iran, but then also being a minority in Australia. These really gave me maybe not legitimacy, but they gave me the opportunity to connect with the people I was working with in ways that were a little bit more immediate. So we could start to identify. So, for example, with Behrouz, we both understood what it's like to live as minorities, his being ethnic and socio-economic, mine being political, but also socio-religious. So we both knew what it's like to be on the outside of a society, on the margins. So that, and when we started to think about power, when we started to think about techniques of control, we were basically on the same page. We would really connect. So that was with a lot of the other people that I worked with. It was the same sort of thing. there's a lot of feminist philosophy and feminist politics in the work that I do, and bringing that to the table, addressing that when I work with women who are in detention, that also creates a better space, a safer space in order to move forward. Also having a kind of a background in kind of decolonial studies, being critical in terms of border studies. In general, having these elements in my toolbox creates the possibility for a more immediate or a more mutual understanding. And in fact, what's interesting, and I'll talk about this in the second half, one of the people I work with, Mira, she was on Nauru. At one point, she reversed the dynamic when it came to research, when it came to engaging in activism and research. She started asking me questions. She started interviewing me. She wanted to know about why I'm doing this, what I plan to get out of it, why I think it's useful. And I thought to myself at that point, this is fantastic. Imagine how much better activism, collaboration, and academic work could be if academics also became the subject of study by people in vulnerable situations. So great question, and I think it's just something in general. It's something I'm maturing when it comes to that.
Thank you, Omid. Since we are already talking about touching upon the second half of your talk, shall we adjourn into the second part of your talk, and we can take other questions after your the second half of your presentation? Should we do that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm very happy to.
Thank you.
I should mention that some of the things that I'm very careful of in terms of engaging with people in vulnerable situations, people who are subject to systematic torture, people who are marginalized and suppressed on so many different levels, is the kinds of tropes that I emphasize or that I center when engaging with them, writing about them, talking to them or about them. So the kind of, and this is what I mean by the way that even people who are supporting refugees can be complicit. And these tropes that I've written down here, I've talked about them in my new book, but I've also talked about them in the translator's note in No Friend But the Mountains and other places. But these are the kinds of tropes you see used right across the spectrum. So people who are against refugees and people who support refugees all use very similar kinds of stereotypes. And what I was saying before about the way that something like No Friend But the Mountains has been referred to as being a miracle, and just unbelievable how something like that can be created. That kind of ties into the mystic sage, quirky and mysterious trickster kind of trope. These things are the result of hard work, collaboration, trust, understanding, research, and so many other factors. But to think that it just pops out of nowhere, it's a miracle. It's kind of dropped from the sky. It's a trope, and it's dangerous. And people are trying to help, but in fact, it's not helping. So the other ones we can go over, and it's the thing is, it's in some of these tropes. Yes, they are part of someone's experience, but you really dehumanize someone when you make their experience only about one trope and a very simple, superficial interpretation of that trope. So we're a mix of so many different things and so many different experiences, and we change over time, and there's many tropes, and we create our own tropes to try to deal with new situations. Reducing people, it strips people of their humanity to think of them according to one superficial reading of a trope. So these are some shots that I took on my third visit to Manus Island, and this is the time when the detention centre had closed, and the people who were detained were moved to other detention centres, and eventually they were moved on to Port Moresby. But when we talk about Manus Prison, we're not just talking about the original location, this one that was closed down. Manus Prison is a concept that actually goes beyond borders. It's about it's more like a soul or a spirit. It's more like an ideology, a characteristic. It seeps in to people's lives, into their bodies, into their minds, into their emotions, in the original detention centre, but it follows them when they go out into Manus society, in the new detention centres, when they go to Port Moresby, even when they're resettled in another country. This issue of Manus Prison is a global phenomenon, and it can only be understood as global. In fact, many people in Australia, for instance, who are complicit or who are somehow benefiting, whether it's their work or their study or their political leanings, whatever it is, you're also a part of Manus Prison. So here, this shot was taken during my first visit to Manus Island, and when representing and translating prison narratives, it was very important that I think about the creative and literary experimentation. So I say creative and literary because, in some cases, I'm working with people in terms of their artworks. There's no writing involved. And there is some interesting things to say about intersemiotic translation, where the symbols or images, figures, are translated into text or vice versa. And the shared philosophical activity, which I've talked about, and the anti-colonialism and the horrific surrealism that is important here. And we think of anti-colonial, not just in terms of the way Australia is exploiting its role in the Pacific, its imperial ambitions in the Pacific, but also more specifically, how it's exploiting the Manusian people, the Papua New Guinea people, New Guineans in general, but more specifically how the Manusians are being affected by these particular policies. And so much of the philosophical work it involves thinking about this in terms of shared experience, in terms of victims, subjects, or the consequences of colonial engagement, colonial exploitation. So with so much of the work that we've been doing, we even have the folklore or the philosophy or the knowledge systems associated with the Manusian people incorporated into our critique of Manus Prison. And here is where things become really fascinating, where you have on both sides, where the people from different parts of the world are bringing their knowledge systems, bringing their aesthetic visions, bringing their storytelling practices into the Manusian context, and the Manusians are sharing their own with the people who are incarcerated. And here we see a really important example of shared philosophical activity. One really important term that I want to discuss is the chiriarchy, or what I refer to as the chiriarchal system. Now, Behrouz in No Friend But the Mountains, he refers to the Manus Prison, or the soul of the system, the spirit of the system, as System Hakem. Now, System Hakem basically, system is using an English term that's used in Persian, but hakem is a term that's used for many different things. It can refer to ruling, governing, controlling, sovereign, dominating, oppressive. There's so many different ways that it can be used, and I was really struggling, I think, for the first quite a few months, maybe after like 4 or 5 chapters translating, I really wasn't happy with the way I was translated System Hakem. I translated as an oppressive system for a while. And I really wasn't happy with that because of the way that what Behrouz was referring to had so many kind of intersectional aspects to it. It was also talking about an oppression that is relentless, that is driven to continue, not to achieve any end, but just to remain intact, remain in operation. And also the system of Hakem is about multiplication. So it not only in an intersectional way, not only do the different oppressions empower each other or strengthen each other, but the different kinds of vulnerable subjects are multiplied within this particular system. So once someone is forced or driven into submission, which is the aim of, if there is an aim, which is the aim of the system of Hakem, once someone's driven into submission, the hierarchical system finds someone else or creates a new victim. So there's this kind of like perpetual domination and control and subjugation taking place. So with all of this in mind, oppressive system just didn't do it, and sometimes people have interpreted hierarchical system as meaning just as a synonym for oppression or control, but which is completely wrong, or violence, completely wrong. The only word I could find was from radical feminist theology, a term hierarchy, which is coined by Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, and she creates this term, which is very similar to Crenshaw's notion of intersectionality and Patricia Hill Collins' notion of matrix of domination. So and she's influenced by a lot of feminists from different parts of the world, such as Chicana feminists, Latin American feminists, feminists from different parts of Africa, radical Black feminists in the US. So she draws on all of these to create this notion of hierarchy for use in her interpretation, radical interpretation, feminist interpretation of the Bible. And I thought that knowing this work from some of the research that I'd done many, many years ago, I saw how the word hierarchy could be adapted for this particular purpose. And it was a huge risk translating system of Hakem as the hierarchical system. It was a huge risk. In fact, our publisher said, this is a very, very unusual term. I'm not sure people are going to, this is a trade publisher for a general audience. And I'm really glad I stuck with it, because so much of the reviews of the commentary related to No Front But the Mountains and afterwards has really focused on the fact that this is a very interesting and important term, and really brings the feminist dimensions of our work, which, of course, I'm influenced by the feminist movements in Iran, but also the anti-colonial feminist movements in different countries, the kind of feminist movements in Australia, but Behrouz also being influenced by the Kurdish feminist movements, especially in Rojava. So there's so much of our backgrounds that have come into play in terms of this notion of hierarchy and the hierarchical system. And we're still developing, we're still expanding it. And I really wanted this to have a place in academic discourse. One of the reasons bringing this term in was also to say that, okay, we want to explore a new way of doing academia and a new experimental way of thinking about these neo-colonial experiments that we're engaging with. Because we are dealing with a neo-colonial experiment. And when I say new languages of resistance, this is one example. So here we have system of Hakem becomes a hierarchical system. And that's from Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza's notion of hierarchy. With Elaher, one of the terms that she used in her work in Iran as an architecture student, was Aram Saishgah. And this is a term that she actually received from Abbas Maroufi, a very famous journalist and novelist in Iran who passed away a number of years ago. I translated this term as abode for serenity. And again, this is an experimental or poetic way of a philosophical way of doing the translation, because really the translation could have come out many different ways, in the same way that system of Hakem could have been oppressive system, but instead became something really unique and experimental and with multidimensional and with so much potential. Aram Saishka in the same way. And here we have these terms, the way that they are presented, the way that they evolve, they are part of a much larger ecosystem of epistemic or intellectual, philosophical ecosystem, which involves horrific surrealism, Manus Prison theory, no prison theory, so on and so forth. Okay, so there's a thought experiment that I wish I had time to go into. I'm just conscious of the time now, we've got 40 minutes, 45 minutes still. Yeah. Oh, great. So here I'm influenced by a number of different philosophers, but I have this one particular thought experiment that I developed. In philosophy, we use a lot of thought experiments to kind of push the boundaries of the principles that we subscribe to, and to see would we still hold those principles if the context were different, if the context were expanded, and to challenge us in terms of what kind of ethical principles we use and we support. One of the things I thought about doing at a certain point when I just finished the translation of No Friend But the Mountains, was create a thought experiment to show the inside-outside dynamic, the way that the island, Manus, or any carceral border associated with Australia, the way that it can't be separated from the mainland, the way it can't be separated from the nation state, I mean. And here, Chandran Kukathas, he's a political theorist who talks about policy and the material conditions that are affected as a result of strengthening borders or making borders more violent, how that will impact the centre, the metropole. I take that, but what I did was I actually thought about the epistemic, the aesthetic, and also the social imaginary. So how is Manus or any carceral border affecting not only the policies, not only the material conditions of the nation state and the citizens, but also our epistemic conditions, our symbolic aesthetic, and our social imaginary? And here we have really interesting ways of thinking about epistemology, thinking of knowledge production, and thinking about how the interdependent relationship between the border and the nation needs to be taken very seriously, and support for people on the subject to imprisonment and systematic torture on the border is actually protecting our own rights. By working against border violence, we're actually protecting ourselves as well, because there is this interdependent relationship between the border and the nation state. And this is what I talk about in the book in more detail. Now I'm going to read the thought experiment just to give you a sense of how suddenly activism, storytelling, translation, and collaboration came together to create a new way of theorizing, a new way of philosophizing, a new kind of public philosophy. And in the same way that the patriarchal system became part of a much broader discourse and is being taken very seriously intellectually and politically, things like this thought experiment is part of the same kind of ecosystem. So I'm just going to read There is an island isolated in a silent ocean where people are held prisoner. The prison cannot experience the world beyond the island. They cannot see the immediate society outside the prison, and they certainly do not learn about what takes place in other parts of the world. They only see each other and hear the stories they tell one another. This is their reality. They are frustrated by their isolation and incarceration, and they have also been taught to accept their predicament. News somehow enters the prison about another island where the mind is free to know and create. The prisoners are given a sense of what life is like on the other island, but they do not have the capacity or experience to understand fully. The people on the other island have special insight. They see things that the prisoners cannot. They create things that the prisoners cannot. And they certainly know things that the prisoners cannot. Some of the prisoners resent the people on the other island. Some simply do not understand the people there or try to undermine them. Some are indifferent to the other society. Some prisoners feel pity for them because they are confident that their own situation is changing for the better and will eventually provide greater freedoms. The two islands are polar opposites. One island kills vision, creativity, and knowledge. It imprisons thought. The other island fosters vision, creativity, and knowledge. It is a land where the mind is free. The first island is the settler colonial state called Australia, and the prisoners are the settlers. The second island contains Manus Prison, and knowledge resides there with the incarcerated refugees. So, as you can see, with that thought experiment, I kind of did a flip at the end, where I was talking about the prison and people in the prison. They end up at the end of that thought experiment, they're the ones who are the citizens in Australia. Well, I should say settlers, not citizens, because First Nations people know very well the kind of atrocities or the kind of persecution we're talking about here. But the settlers are the ones that are in prison and the ones that don't know. Refugees in the detention centres, we've shown through this kind of collaboration, this kind of work, that they have special insight, special knowledge, special creativity. They know state-sanctioned violence in ways that settlers don't. Here's some examples of text messages between, just to give you a sense of what I was saying, of the kind of cell, the kind of prison-like nature of the WhatsApp context. So these are text messages between me and Behrouz. And here is, at the end of chapter 1, notes on translation. Here I've got on the left-hand side, these are examples from the book that I've translated. And on the right-hand side, you've got examples from the text messages. Now, you can see very clearly that the work in Persian is written in prose. So then it's more, maybe more like a poetic or a rhythmic prose, but it's prose. In translating, at a certain stage, I realized that certain parts of the text were sounding more like poetry when I was translating them into English. So I changed the format completely. So Persian prose was translated into English verse. And also you can see how sometimes one sentence or even a fragment of a sentence ends up becoming a whole poem of multiple lines. And here I experiment with many different forms of synonyms, many different styles of expression. I use a lot of repetition. So, for example, if you see in example 3, a dad who certainly, a dad who is, a dad who is held, a dad who is rendered weak. So this kind of repetition of dad, that was necessary, even though dad only appears once in the Persian. That was necessary because I had to break up the very long Persian sentence. Now, the Persian sentence has the the subject at the beginning and the main verb right at the end. And it would be impossible to have a very kind of acceptable or meaningful or even stylish translation if you actually stuck to the sentence structure. So what I had to do was break the long sentences into little sentences. But to do that meant repeating nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, phrases. Here we have another example. Now, the last chapter, chapter 12 in No Friend But the Mountains, that actually came to me directly as one WhatsApp message. So before that, Behrouz would be sending little bits and pieces to Munes Mansoubi, and she would be putting them into PDFs and then sending them to me. But the last chapter, which coincided with the 23-day siege, which Behnam knows very, very well, the kind of the 2017 siege that where refugees resisted. It was interesting that the chapter was finished at the same time as the siege was taking place and ending. So in the last chapter is about the riot/uprising that took place in 2014. So here, Behrouz sent me the bits and pieces, and I translated by dividing the sentences up. And if you notice on the left, the first text that I received from Behrouz was in past tense. Now, everything Behrouz wrote was in past tense. At a certain point, we actually transformed everything into present tense, and the book just took on another level of style, of, I guess, literary quality because of that. So, I can give you an example of the kind of experimentation that took place. So on the left-hand side, where Choka was chanting, the melody wandered through. Choka avaz mikhanad, which is Choka Choka was chanting. صدایش می آمد. So its sound came through, but here I translated as the melody wandered through. So here you can see the kind of experimentation that took place there, and how in some places I actually stuck to the sentence structure. In other places I diverted and mixed it up completely. And again, the work was all in prose, and I translated it originally as prose, but if you see on the right, it's all translated into verse in English. Now, with here we have Elahe's archive. So these are exclusive, never seen before images and examples that that Elahe collected over her 6 years in Nauru, and it's these that she uses in relation to the exhibition that we organised in Sydney at UTS. It's these that she uses for her paintings now that she's off the island and not imprisoned anymore, and it's these that she uses also for the research that we do, for the academic articles that we produce together. She writes in English very well, but there are a mix of different things. Our conversations are in Persian. Our sometimes bits and pieces are sent to me in Persian that need to be translated. So there's no kind of systemic form of translation taking place here. Sometimes I get voice messages. Sometimes I get text. It's a mix of different things. And when I show Behnam's example, you'll see from The Hague, you'll see how sometimes we can take that experimentation and that unpredictability and unconventionality to other levels. And again, this is more from Elahe's archive. On the left, is one of her paintings. On the right is her render from the 3D model that she created of Nauru. So her upcoming film is Architect, but the border industrial complex paintings is already, she already has quite a few of those and just completed another one. And Weapons of Slow Destruction is the exhibition that took place at UTS involving her archive. So here, this article is the one that I wrote with Behrouz, Mira, and Elahed. And Mira, which is a pseudonym, she studied psychology in Iran. And she was the one who I mentioned that started to interview me, started to put me under question. And remarkably, she was one of her inspirations while she was locked up in Nauru was Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And here, again, the importance of translation. She was listening to the translated ebook of Man's Search for Meaning, and that impacted her along with other biographies and other works. And she's continued her work, her psychology work as well. And after she's left Nauru, and there's a lot to say about this kind of collaboration. So I was kind of like the hub in this article, and everyone else was kind of sending me their bits and pieces to manage and modify, and then send back to them for approval. So this was again another example of collaboration, activism, translation, and storytelling all coming together. Mohammed Adam, I'd love to read, if I had time, I would love to read some of his work, but there's Esperanza Bielsa, who a translation scholar and sociologist, she writes in her book, I think it's called A Sociological Translation, she in her book on translation, she talks about how translators can have the tendency to transform a text so it's more accommodating, so it's more palatable for a Western or European or Anglo audience. And it kind of removes the kinds of strangeness or foreignness in the original writing. And this is something I read her work later, but when I was finding a translator for Muhammad's work, he's from Sudan but wrote in Arabic. One of my former students at American University in Cairo, who I collaborated with, he translated very well some of his work, which is published in Writing Through Fences and Transition special issue. And at one point, he talks about taste of hair. And one of the editors of I think it was the Southerly, changed it to taste of air, because he was referring to the kind of environment where he grew up in Sudan, in the refugee camp, and he was referring to taste of air. She changed it to taste of air. But I thought to myself, I really feel there was something about taste of hair that he was on purpose. So I checked with him and I checked with a translator, and yes, his intimacy with his siblings and his friends during his upbringing was so intimate, so close, and so special that he referred to the experience as giving him the taste of hair. And so we left it as that. And in another place, he also talks about traveling by boat to Australia and the kind of talking to shells and dolphins and kind of this very mythical or legendary way of engaging with the water, engaging with the life in the water. And that, again, I really emphasized the foreignness or the strangeness of the text, rather than change it in a way that makes it a little bit more understandable or less weird for a Western audience. And finally, Ben Amsata, who, as I mentioned, the main leader in Manus, and someone who was also an interpreter and a translator, did so much work, even from the time he was in Indonesia, before even coming to Australia, did so much work, engaged with the police, with elders in Manus Island, in the courts, working with multiple languages, Kurdish, Persian, English, Tok Pisin, and now he's in France, working in French. I'm going to read, just to finish off, I'm going to read the section where he talks about his visit to The Hague, because this is something that this developed in a very special way, where he sent me a part of a statement by text message. He sent in Persian. He sent me text messages, voiced messages in Persian and English. He then modified and sent me bits and pieces in English to clarify some points. And so this particular text was written as part translation, part co-writing, part co-editing, part written by Benham, part written by me. So it's something that it defies description, defies explanation, and it's, you know, in many ways it's that kind of anti-genre or the kind of genre bending example. So here he posted up on Facebook, official statement: Manus and Nauru survivors make formal submission to ICC. Representative Benham Sata. For the people who suffered years of torture in Australia's offshore immigration prisons in Manus Island, PNG and Nauru, the struggle for justice is long and hard. Most of us are now trying to rebuild our lives in different countries, but we carry the scars from years of imprisonment, torment and humiliation. We will never forget what the Australian government put us through, and we continue to support each other in any way we can. Also, we will always remember the people who lost their lives and honour their memory by continuing to expose and dismantle Australia's cruel and corrupt border industrial complex. On Monday, the 6th of May, 2024, I visited the International Criminal Court in The Hague. I have been collaborating with many people who were illegally incarcerated in offshore prisons, and I worked with experienced lawyers to make a submission well in advance. I had the privilege of representing a large group of us at the ICC. Our aim is to have our voices heard in the court and achieve justice for everyone who was targeted by Australia's border regime. We believe this is an important step in our plight. We aim to present to the court important evidence about what we endured over many years and convey crucial information pertaining to the ways people were killed or driven to suicide. Unfortunately, staff at the ICC were not open to engaging with us on Monday and denied my request to address various representatives. I was also refused entry into the area within the ICC, which is open to the public. The reasons they gave me are unacceptable, considering that we approached them 6 months ago with our submission by using their standard process. It is unfair, but these experiences are not uncommon for us. We will continue to pursue the matter. We will eventually address the court and arrive one step closer to making real systemic change. Our situation is complex and difficult, but we always knew that it would take time before we can hold Australian authorities accountable. I am discussing next steps with our group and our legal team so we can make the appropriate plans going forward. No human being should be treated the way we were, and we are doing our best to make sure it does not continue. We are confident that we will be heard and make progress next time. And he ends by thanking a number of people who helped him with this post and with this submission. This final part that's in the conclusion in my book is an example of what this kind of collective resistance can achieve, what can happen, where it can go, what sort of possibilities there are, and also it gives us more examples of what kind of intellectual, philosophical, artistic projects can emerge from this kind of work, from this combination of collaboration, activism, translation, and storytelling. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Omid. I'm sure we have questions and sharing from all those big applauses. Shall we invite participants to raise their questions or sharing? While our participants are digesting what we have heard, may I just raise something we have discussed a little bit yesterday, Omid, is the human dimension between the translator and the clients we serve or our collaborators. It also tie in with something Cherise just asked about the building of trust, and it also ties in with your. I find it fascinating and in fact very humbling the self-reflection that you are highlighting and emphasizing for us. So how would you understand the human dimension between yourself and the friends you're collaborating with, the friends you're working with?
Yeah, that's an important one. I talked a little bit about what kind of the caution that needs to be taken into account, and also the self-reflection, self-critique, and also I think not thinking about my relationship as victim savior is really important. So thinking of our relationship more in terms of collaboration or partnership, rather than me, in a condescending way, me doing something for someone who's poor and needy. Again, that goes back to the tropes that I was criticizing before. They're not just broken people. They're not just strugglers, or they're not just someone in vulnerable position or in a tragic position. There are a whole range of different things, including artists, knowledge producers, thinkers, leaders, writers, so many different things. So there's keeping all of this in mind and thinking about what I can bring to the table, but also what they can bring for me that I can't access otherwise. So this was very similar to what I was talking about earlier in relation to public philosophy. This is a kind of public philosophy where the philosopher isn't on top, isn't the one dictating terms. Here, we've got a very different kind of public philosophy taking place, that the philosopher actually needs the people who are on the margins, in the vulnerable position, people who are subject to border violence, needs them in order to produce, to engage, to think on different levels. And I think the last thing that I'll say in relation to your question, which is such an important theme, and I've thought about it on different levels in terms of ethics, but also in terms of epistemology and aesthetics. And I think horrific surrealism is really helpful here. And this absurdity, this kind of exploitation, this ridiculousness, all of these things that I described earlier in my talk about horrific surrealism, this also is part of the relationship between me and the people who are in the detention centers, or who were previously in the detention centers. We have to accept that the whole situation is absurd. It's ridiculous. Yeah. It shouldn't be this way. I can't remove myself from the power imbalance. It's impossible. We just need a new lens to think about it. This is all horrifically surreal. The fact that I go to events in the past and on the screen is someone who is in a detention center, and we're talking to an audience of professors and students and researchers, it's totally surreal. It's ridiculous. And I go and, have these discussions with everyone afterwards, and have a drink and have something to eat. Whereas once the camera goes off, they have to go back to their cell. Horrific surrealism. It's right across everything that we do, and acknowledging that in terms of its epistemic and aesthetic as well as its ethical, I think is important.
Right. Thank you. We have a sharing from Nabil, and would you want to turn off to turn on your mic, Nabil, or would you want us to read out your comments?
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for giving me the chance to talk and share my views. And hope you are well, Omid-jan.
Thank you. Yes, hope you are well too.
Thank you so much. And I've written here in some comments First of all, I should appreciate what you've mentioned as are one of the greatest things are happening in today's world. And thank you so much for sharing your views and the very, very interesting and impressive views, Omid. Thank you so much. And recently I have traveled to Turkey and I've visited many refugees there. And I tried to talk to them personally. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. But the conversation happened between me and some of the refugees, so that how the language of resistance refugees use to protect themselves in Turkey influence the government of Turkey to apply the same language of resistance against the refugees to protect themselves, to protect the national identity of Turkish people. And I just commented here these the experience of myself, and my purpose was to show that how your interesting point of views can be connected to academia and can crawl into the academia circle, and maybe the connection between national identity, politics, and exploitation can be traced here. And I just wanted to take a note and share my views and my experiences here.
Yeah, that was brilliant. That's exactly the kind of response that, or one of the kinds of responses that I was hoping that this talk would encourage or invite. And I just want to say something about the way that the Turkish government is using the way they're using language to kind of reinforce or manipulate kind of notions of national identity, and I think with the work that I was doing, one of the things that I didn't get to mention earlier in response to one of the questions was that we actually, by challenging the narrative, by creating new languages of resistance in the way that we do with things like the Karyakal system or Manus Prison theory, the notion of Manus Prison, these are all in direct response to what the official narrative or the official language by the government and many journalists have already put in circulation. So Manus Prison is a response to regional processing center. You know, that this sanitized term of regional processing center sounds almost like a kind of like a transition camp or a transition kind of accommodation or something like that. It's completely removed from what is actually taking place there. So Manus Prison kind of like encourages a new way of thinking about it, or something like processing. The notions like processing. We talk about systematic torture instead because there's no processing taking place. You know, even with the ideology, the soul of the system that doesn't even have a name, we create the name, the Karyakal system, and then we do things by, like, for example, we do things that actually disrupt the official narrative by combining kind of colonial history of PNG with colonial history of Australia, by bringing in sort of the kind of forms of resistance within Iran or in Kurdistan, and bringing all of these together and creating new ways of thinking about confronting power. These are all ways that we oppose the standard narrative and the official language of the government and mainstream media. So yeah, it's not a surprise that that's what they're doing in Turkey. And you know, when it comes to border politics, I think the first border we all have to admit is language. You know, and the first border that they create is language. And that's why the role of translators and interpreters is so important in terms of resistance or people collaborating with people inside, but also the translators and interpreters inside, like Benam, like Elahe, like so many others who were involved as translators and interpreters. So these are make, or it actually describes or helps describe the resistance as multidimensional in ways that haven't been seen. Thank you, Nabil.
Hello. This is Wiping Out here as Director of the Center for Translation here at the Baptist University. Thanks very much, Omid, for a fascinating presentation, touching as it does upon some very important and interesting issues. I'm especially interested in the images of the translator and the metaphorics of translations that emerge from your discussion about your own practice as a translator. For example, you talked about translation as a collective, collaborative, creative, reflective political practice, form of public inquiry. I mean, that's so refreshing. I mean, very often we tend to think of translators as individuals working on their own in isolation from the original author and so on and so forth. So this is a very, very refreshing image about the translator, and it does, I think, it does go some way towards addressing some of the thorny issues you mentioned, for example, the questions about complexity, about complacency, and so on and so forth. I mean, this collective sense that is built into the practice of translation as a transformative process, I think it does go some way towards addressing these issues. I mean, for example, I mean, we can never wash our hands of the systems of domination we find ourselves in. I mean, we can never do that. I mean, but I mean, it does seem possible, for example, as practitioners of translation in its many different forms, to cross boundaries. I mean, whether it is generic, stylistic, linguistic, culture, and so on and so forth. I mean, you're crossing boundaries all the time. So this image of the translator seems to me very, very refreshing and quite empowering. I mean, he talked about all the constraints and the adverse conditions in which translators operate. That this image seems to me a very, very powerful one, and I think it does. I mean, it does help us to somewhat. Not sense of optimism, but sense of hopefulness. I mean, because this is exactly what we need in times like these. Yeah, just a thought, not a question.
Yes, no, I really appreciate that, Wei Ping. It's again, you've raised some points that I could talk for a long time in relation to, and I do address these to a certain extent in my new book. But I think two things that I wanted to bring up. One of them is that storytelling is important here for me. Storytelling was actually what got me into translation work. So there was in the kind of main themes that I wanted to promote in my book and in this talk were the connection between collaboration, activism, translation, and storytelling. And the storytelling element, I haven't really gone into much detail about. But your comment really made me think that I should say a few more words in this context. So, growing up, I was basically in many contexts. I found myself interpreting. So I was for my parents or for family friends, and in different sorts of situations, I'd often be thinking and engaging in two languages, and I never actually thought about this as developing a skill. And when I got into translation, it was only because I was an activist first. So I was involved in activism, and it was only when some people came to me and said, could you help us with interpreting with someone, or could you translate something that we want to communicate with someone else. It was only in this activist space that I started to translate, not just and interpret both at the same time. And I just realized how naturally it came. And I realized, hang on, this is something that I've been doing for almost my whole life, and that's why it came so naturally. And also not having a background in translation formally, and meant that I was a little bit free. I didn't have any inhibitions or any kind of like constraints or formalities that I needed to follow. I was really doing things totally experimental, in a totally experimental way. Some of the first works that I translated were some hip hop lyrics that an Iranian refugee asked me to translate for him. He spent some time in immigration detention, and outside immigration detention, he was friends with an Indigenous rapper in Australia who was a centre that I used to go to, and so he's my friend, the Indigenous rapper. He said to me, there's a guy who comes to the center and he doesn't speak any English, and but he raps really well. And so anyway, there's an article online where I actually translate some of his lyrics, and so I was interpreting for him and translating his lyrics, and that kind of started me these kinds of stories, the stories of growing up, the stories of hearing about other people leaving Iran, experiencing borders, experiencing displacement and exile. All of these stories ended up leading me to translation, and I think I have one of the subchapters in my book, crossing borders and arriving at translation, something like that. And so this storytelling element, I think, is an important one, and important to understand the translation product. So the storytelling is an integral part of the process and the planning. And for myself, that planning goes back, decades, and you can't remove storytelling, the storytelling element of my past from the work that I'm doing now. And I think that goes with all literary translators or activist translators. The last thing I will say is about, you talk very positively about the role of translators and what translators can do. I think it's also really important to think about how translators are oppressive as well. I mean, translation into English has a long colonial history when it comes to religious texts and colonial administrative texts and all sorts of things. And now governments are using translations to keep people from seeking asylum, confusing people, denying them the access to their rights, and all sorts of things. So I think we have to factor that one in, and also it actually indicates or highlights how important the activist form of translation is, because we're up against a large machine, like I said before, a hierarchical system.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. I think Hao Tehao has been waiting for a while, if I have not mispronounced your name.
Thank you. You can say Frank from Benin. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Omid, for your talk. Unfortunately, when we started, the talk started, it has been a heavy rain here, so I couldn't hear from the beginning. But I can notice that you tackled something that is very, very important, meaning how language is used to tackle violence or to tackle human rights violation of people in refugee camps and people facing hard situations because of life issues. I want to ask you how you do. Do you often translate their thoughts into public, like what they think about the government, what they think about administration? I know that for having been in activism for a good while now, I know that whatever the government does, the groups, the vulnerable groups always think that the government is not doing anything good, and or the government is not doing as much as they want. So sometimes they insult and abuse against the government. How do you manage that if you are to interpret them, or you are to you suppose that you have an official before them, and then the official is talking to them, and you are interpreting, or you have to translate the text that they want to send to the official government, and in the text there are a lot of insult, abuse, and things like that. How do you how do you handle that? Thank you.
That's a great point. First of all, I'm gonna say that with one thing that I didn't mention was the importance of consultation and sharing as well. So when I'm doing my translation work, I'm in constant communication with the people I'm translating for. So when it comes to their thoughts and intentions, those conversations factor in, and a lot of change takes place. And a lot of the times, we might disagree. So I might say to them that I don't think this is. I think you should rethink this, or this is fantastic. You should do more of this. So this is an important part of the translation process. This kind of consultation and collaboration and sharing that takes place, and with the people I work with. Like all of us, when we write, when we're developing something, we go back and revise. And sometimes people revise, and giving people the opportunity to revise and having this trust between us is important, because you can make criticism of each other, of me as well. So when it comes to something like criticizing the government or being really harsh against the government, with some people like Behrouz, for example, there were times when he was very harsh against the government, and we talk about how important is it to say what he's saying strategically. Is this going to have the best outcome? Because sometimes being even harsher can have a good outcome, can be important, but sometimes not being less harsh would mean that it's okay. There's something I should mention with my book. At one point, it was about to be released at the end of December, right at the end of the year, and I had to put it on pause for about 2 months because there were new laws that came into effect in Australia, and I was worried that it might. The things that I was talking about might put some people in danger. So here I had to not necessarily self-censor, but I had to readjust some of the things that I was saying, not so that obviously because of the responsibility I have as well. So I guess that doesn't really answer your question. It really depends on the circumstance and on the situation. Some people, yes. Some people, no. Some people, I encourage them to be even more critical. Some people I say, look, maybe now is not the right time to be like that. So it's really what's happening at the time, and context and situation is everything. Context and situation specific.
You are both translator and law advisor.
Come again?
You are both a translator and a law advisor.
We're collaborators when we work together, and we just they're like my research. People I work with are like my research partners. We do whatever is needed.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It was, Jessica, I think Morven had a quick comment that she wanted to make in relation to something that I said before. If you wanted to maybe jump in quickly.
Do we have time, Jessica? I'm aware I've asked a question already.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
All right. I was just going to say how helpful these kinds of tropes about thinking about refugees are. And I think that we see that very much in discourse on interpreting, for example, in asylum procedures, where still there's a lot of, either kind of savior discourse of you need to go in and help these poor people, or, you know, on the other hand, this like distrust, you know, they're the enemy coming in, and we need to, you know, very much in the discourse about interpreting within those systems. And I think that both of these discourses are sometimes seen as simply describing what's happening rather than also positioning those interpreters. I mean, interpreting for a governmental or governmental institution, you have a certain brief in asylum circumstances. So very, very interesting. And I think that's something we could take to kind of reflect on the role of interpreters in those contexts. But yeah, you've explained a lot of some of, you know, your examples gave me answers to some of the other questions that I had earlier on. Thank you. Really interesting talk.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd really like to develop that whole discourse on tropes. You know, the kind of connection between politics and aesthetics and rhetoric, I think, is really important, and epistemology, I think, is really important, and the kind of storytelling devices that are kind of part of the way we think and talk and interpret, I think, are vital here.
Yeah, and perhaps just a small point, I wanted to thank you for your transparency in showing us the processes that went into those, into the translation. That's fascinating, and something we often don't get a look at in creating the product, which we often very much focus on. So thank you very much for that. Really useful.
No worries. My new book has plenty more examples of that.
Thank you. Before we finish the talk this evening, there are two things Omid has very generously agreed to share with all of us. One thing is the recording of this seminar, and it's going to be on the website. And we are also thinking about putting it on YouTube. And Esther and I will discuss with Omid further on this. And the other thing very important is there is a discount code for his new book, Creating New Language of Resistance, Translation, Public Philosophy, and Border Violence. And there's a discount code which we are also going to share by email to everybody. So we have two good news. So do we have anything else this evening? Omid, I think that the last word has to be yours and Benham's.
I think I've talked enough. Benham, would you like to? I mean, I'm really fascinated to hear what you think. But if you want to make any comments, any last comments?
Yeah, I would like to say my appreciation to everyone for asking great questions, and also for Omid to replying very correctly and very completely about this. As Omid said, almost said everything, and I wanted to emphasize that it's really, really important the way and the role of interpreter and translators, especially if you have the same situation for those you are interpreting or translating for. Sometimes you are translating the same pain that you are going through, but for another person, and it would be very, very hard, and it will be very affecting the whole situation that we are in. And as if it was not because of the helps of someone like Omid or other people who really helped us during that time during detention in Australia, we wouldn't be able to get our voice outside and to let people know what's really happening. For me personally, I was dealing with plenty things inside camp that I really didn't have time to come outside and talk about what happened, because I was dealing with like 20, 30 things in a day, and because the majority of people there wouldn't speak English and I had to interpret for them. And all this burden of their pain plus my own suffering, it would create a big trauma at the same day for me. But at the end, it was we were all going through the same harsh policies by Australian government, and we had to endure those horrible times. And I am sure translator or interpreter in other places, they would go through the same emotions at the people that they are translating for, and it affects them a lot. And That's all I wanted to say, and I appreciate Dr. Tofighian and Jessica for arranging this conference, and I am very honored to be with you guys today.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Behnam.
you.
The honor's all mine to have you here, Behnam. And I guess I think what would be wonderful is one day you and I actually give a presentation together. And some of the things that you say, what you said just now, it's something that I'm unable to share in the same kind of with the same sort of power and the same sort of significance. So I think if doing it together would be fantastic in the future.
I will be honored. I will be looking forward for that.
Yeah.
Let's arrange that. So we may we hold you both to that possibly sometime in 2026, if you don't mind our very humble insignificant platform, and it would be our honor to host you.
Same here. Same here. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone as well. Thank you for organizing, and thank you for being here and engaging.
Thank you. And well, I'm totally speechless, and well, there is so much more to talk about. Let's organize our second event together, and perhaps we can bring in more friends, interpreters, and people, friends suffering in similar or comparable situations. We will have so much to talk about together.
Thank you.
Thank you. So good evening, please. Everybody keep well, and look after yourself, because we have to keep resisting. And Behnam's got a message. Thank you. Thank you. So good evening. Keep well, folks.